So I'm a professor at MIT and also a founder of Neural Magic. I want to talk to you today a little bit about what I do at MIT, about my research. So I want to kind of touch on how learnings from computational neurobiology, which is a field that I do research in, impact and influence what we should be doing in machine learning. So you look at this picture, it takes you 1/10 of a second to know that this is Mount Fuji. And you do that with neural tissue, right? And so I want to kind of try to capture a little bit of what it is that we do, you know, at MIT, at Harvard, people in the field that I work in called connectomics, to actually map neural tissue, and then what can we take away from that? So to do this mapping, what we do is we take a little sliver of an animal brain, typically a mouse or a rat, we put it on a, we put it in a resin, put it on a microtome, and slice it. We slice it many, many times and drop it into water, and then it goes onto a tape. We take the tape, and now we have a lot of brain slices on a tape. They look something like this. Okay, these are these slices, these pieces of tape, and each one of these little things that you see there is a sliver of a mouse brain. Now, we take a very powerful electron microscope. This, by the way, is a picture of my colleague Jeff Lichtman from Harvard. The image is supposed to show you how short Jeff is. And with this powerful microscope, we actually image these slices. Okay? So here's an example. These are 10,000 slices, about 100 terabytes, okay, of imaging of a mouse brain. So you take these slices, and if we take them all together, okay, then what we basically have, right, is this cube, okay? And if we then take this cube, right, which is essentially, you know, this cube, this 10,000 slice cube, which is about 100 terabytes, that thing is like a grain, it's a grain of salt, okay? So it's been cut 10,000 times and imaged. Now, we take this cube, okay, here's a tiny piece of the cube, and we basically do a reconstruction process. So you take, you know, slice after slice of this cube, and in the slices, we use machine learning technology, okay, a lot of algorithms that we've developed, to actually segment the neurons, and then from these segmented neurons, we reconstruct, right, the structure of what is going on in this little sliver of brain. Okay, here you can see a blue and a red parts of a neuron, okay, and a connection between them, a synapse. Here's you can see the synapse where the blue and the orange neurons connect. Now, this synapse, right, these are the weights in your brain, these are the parameters. Okay, and you have a quadrillion of these in your head. So we take these, you know, these kind of reconstructions, and what you can see in there, if you take a little sliver of brain, is here are two dendrites, parts of the receptive part of axons, of neurons. Here are all the dendrites in a volume. So it's kind of looks really packed and dense. And in the same volume, you also have a lot of axons going through, okay, the messaging parts of the neurons. And you have glia cells, support cells, that provide food and energy to the neurons. And all together, you have this really dense kind of volume of your brain. And this is a tiny sliver. Of course, your brain, right, is thousands and thousands of times bigger than this sliver that I showed you. Okay, so what does this have to do with machine learning, right? So here's how I would like to think of it. So we're told, great, machine learning, it's essentially, a throughput computing problem, right? It's we have an enormous market for this. We're building GPUs and TPUs and so on, right? And their structure, right, is supposed to mimic the brain, right? We're told this is how we're going to do it. And so what is the structure, right? We have these thousands of cores, right? We have them connected to high bandwidth memory, and then and we put the image, the input, and the network into the memory, into the high bandwidth memory, and we compute. So we apply thousands of terabytes, actually this should be 3,000 terabytes, teraops of compute onto this, onto this data. And the idea is, right, that I take this, I take this one GPU, I put it together, and now I have essentially the equivalent of a brain. But if we actually look at what compute looks like in the brain, okay, so the human cortex has about 16 billion neurons, and they spike about every 0.16 times per second. Okay, this is an image of neurons firing in the brain. And you have every neuron has about 7,000 synapses, okay? Now, 7,000 synapses doesn't mean it has 7,000 connections, 7,000 weights, because actually neurons connect multiple times to one another. As you can see here, there's multiple connections between the blue and the green. And so we can think of it as, let's say, 700. So if I have 700 connections, if I do the calculation, that's about 2 trillion operations per second, right? So an iPhone does about 5 trillion. So what we can see here is that really Cortex is about 5 or 6 orders of magnitude less compute than a TPU pod. Actually, sorry, 5 or 6 orders, 3 or 4 orders of magnitude less than a TPU, let's put it that way. And in terms of memory size, okay, the human cortex has about 300 trillion synapses, okay? That's about 1.2 petabyte if I just want to represent the graph in the simplest way. And so if you think about a typical GPU, TPU, even now that it's 40 gigs or 80 gigs, right, what we get in the end is that, compared to regular, GPU, this is, again, something like 3 or 4 orders of magnitude too small, right? So what is it that I'm trying to say? What I'm trying to say is this, that what we have, right, what we're building right now is essentially something that does, let's say, 3,000 teraops of compute on about, an iPhone of memory, okay? But what we need, right, is an iPhone of compute on a petabyte of memory, okay? So we're building the wrong thing, and we're building the wrong thing not because we just don't know what the algorithm is, okay? So not knowing the algorithm has brought us to this place. Okay, but we're moving ahead. What is it that's happening? Well, NVIDIA's done an amazing job, right, of pushing forward, the compute on a GPU. You can see the black line. We're at, teraflops, thousands and thousands of teraflops, but the memory, the red line, hasn't really moved enough, right? A desktop, your desktop can hold a brain, okay, but not a, but a H100 can't, right? In fact, right, if you want to represent Llama 405B, right, you need 11 GPUs, okay? 11 GPUs, 2 GPU nodes of 8 each, right? And that thing, right, is extremely wasteful. So here's a graph, right, of the kind of, the compression that you can do for a 405B, for a 70B, or for a 8B Llama model. So if you look at these graphs, right, what you see essentially is that with quantization and sparsity, you can actually reduce the size of the model. This is done with LLM compressor. This is a piece of software that my company Neural Magic has contributed to VLLM. And you can see that we can really do a great job of reducing the size of the model, okay? And that's a step. That's what we're doing today, right? But is that really the solution that we're going to use in the future? So the hardware providers are trying to make attempts to combine, right, CPUs and GPUs, right, to kind of get the benefit of the way CPUs control memory, right, and bring that to the world of GPUs. Is that the solution? It seems like, right, we're missing the key point here. And that's what I'm saying. Right now, this is what we have, right? It's great. Going down from 11 GPUs to 2 is wonderful in the short term. But in the long term, right, what we really need to do is kind of capture what neural computation is doing. And what neural computation does, right, is I want you to walk away with essentially two things, okay? So one, neural computation, even though what I showed you, the images I showed you, looked extremely dense, right? It's actually very sparse. It's sparse in the connectivity, and it's sparse in the actual firing. So these are, there's not that many, connections, and the connections themselves, the neurons themselves, are not firing that often, okay? The other thing is that brains have incredible locality of reference, okay? A neuron fires into its neighboring neuron. So if you want the computing equivalent of this, it's like all the weights are there in the hardware. Everything is in cache, okay? And so it's extremely efficient. So the hope is, of course, right, that we can mimic this in, in actual silicon, or, in the future in other mediums beyond silicon, right? And that's kind of where I think we should be going. So thank you very much.